Welcome back to A Bloke Talking. In today's podcast, we speak to Karl Smith about what is truly the adventure of a lifetime. From trekking with hill tribes in the Golden Triangle of Asia to traversing the Grand Canyon, Karl takes us with him on his travels and opens up into a fascinating recount of his journey across the world. In the context of his travels, we find tremendously valuable insight of the importance of following your heart, seizing your opportunities, and confronting your risks with a brave mindset. Karl is a modern day pioneer, and his story helped me reflect on my own ambitions with a refreshing perspective. I believe he will have the same effect on many more people, and with that being said, I hope you enjoy today's podcast. As I said just before we got started, I think the most interesting point for us to get into here is just tell me where you've been in the world. Tell me where your travels have taken you.
So, back in 88, 89, I was working in London, commuting up every day. Got a bit tired of the same faces, same people, same expressions, and I decided to go off on a around the world trek with a backpack on.
Yeah.
So in terms of where I've been, broadly, so I've been to Asia, I went to Thailand, travelled around there for a fair bit, then travelled all the way down the peninsula into Malaysia, and then from Malaysia into Singapore, and then from Singapore I flew out into Indonesia, which was Bali, essentially.
Yeah.
And then from Bali, flew, it's about, if I remember right, about a 10-hour flight down into Australia. Spent 3 or 4 months in Australia, and then flew travelled around Australia. Didn't fly around, travelled around on the Greyhound buses, and then I flew out of Australia directly to, well, not directly, via New Zealand actually, but didn't stop off in New Zealand to Hawaii. Spent an interesting 2 or 3 weeks there, and then I flew into LA in the States. Had a bit of time around the West Coast, and then with a fellow backpacker, we drove right across the States to Buffalo, which, if you don't know, is just the other side of the Niagara Falls to Canada.
Right.
And then I walked across into Canada, and then got another coach to Toronto, where we had family or close family friends, and I spent about a month in Toronto, working a bit actually, and then eventually got a bit homesick and decided to fly home. So that's broadly speaking where I've been.
So we should dive into some very interesting points in there to start, but I really want to home in just before we go anywhere on your travels of what it was like, that sort of brewing moment just before you went, where you thought, I've got to go, I've got to go somewhere.
It's interesting story that. So as I said, I was doing the commuting bit into London. First sort of jobs from leaving school. I've been in it about 4 or 5 years. It was good fun, but didn't feel I was going anywhere.
Yeah.
So I remember I was on the train one day and decided I'm going to go. I'd had 1 or 2 friends or people that had touched it and done it themselves. And I went into work, nothing arranged, no tickets booked, and said to my boss, right, I'm giving you 6 months notice. So I wanted time to plan.
Yeah.
And then that lunchtime, I went up to, it was a well-known backpackers travel agent in Earls Court, called Trail Finders. Still going today. And they specialised in round the world tickets. Sat in there at lunchtime, planned out a broad itinerary, booked my ticket. But those days, with overland sections, it was about 800 quid to fly around the world, and that was it.
Really?
So it's all done and decided in a train journey up to work that morning.
So this was absolutely spontaneous.
It was, yeah.
Sounds as though it was something that had been brewing for quite a while, though.
It was in my mind to go. I don't know if anyone that commutes to London regularly probably will know some days you're on that train, you think, what on earth am I doing? So it just came to me. I thought, right, let's go. Yeah. You need to make a commitment. You need to resign. That's the first thing. Then you got no choice. Then go and get the ticket. And then it started to evolve from there, basically.
So what was the thought process of doing it backpacking rather than any other way? Because my brother, just on an interesting point, he's been backpacking. He came back last year from backpacking from here to India, and it was a very contentious point with him and my mum, because obviously she was worried about him.
Understandable.
Of it's you know, it would be far safer doing it in the sort of the typical way. Why did you choose to do it backpacking?
Do you know, that's a really interesting question. That I think a budget.
Yeah,
That's the first thing.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can't, if you're going to be away that length of time, you can't afford to stay in hotels. It just wouldn't, the budget wouldn't stretch that far. Although I'd been working for 5-6 years, I'd had some savings, but nothing extraordinary. And from the people I'd spoken to, they'd backpacked. So it seemed to be the thing to do, really.
Right.
You know what? It didn't even enter my head to think about hotels or doing it any other way, really.
So it sort of just fell into place that was on that fateful day on that train journey. It was, I want to go, and backpacking is the way to do it.
I mean, I think it is now, but even back then, the backpacking thing for fairly young 20-somethings was a big thing.
Yeah.
And it's what you do.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was no conscious decision around backpacking. It just seemed to be the right way, and budget, I think.
With regard to money, I have to say this is something I know a lot of people come into question with. How much money did you sort of put away for? You had your 6 months going into this, and it was £800 for you to sort of do the trip. But how much money did you think, right, I need enough to do what I need to do and go where I need to go?
It's another good one to reflect on. It's so long ago. Do you know what? I maybe did do some basic arithmetic to work out how much I'd have a day. I bought a few backpacking books, you know, like Lonely Planet, stuff like that, and it gave you an idea. But I suppose all that time ago, 35 years ago, I had about £3,000, I think, 2.5, £3,000 to take, which to me now doesn't seem like a lot of money, actually. And I can't honestly remember how much that budgeted out, but I knew I had the backup of a working visa,
Right.
For Australia, which I applied for and got. It's like not permanent. You can be there for about a year on a working visa. So I think my premise was that get to Australia, and if the funds have run out or they're really depleted, then work, which actually, as we'll talk about, is what I did.
Yeah. So just on that point, we shall come back to this later, but what was your working experience in Australia? Did you get to a point where you had to do that work?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, pretty much. The budget, by the time I got to Australia, the funds were depleting. I had, in those days, I mean, I had a credit card. It's one of my biggest regrets, actually. I regret I didn't bash my credit card as much as I could have done. I was very conscious of not coming back to freaking loads of debt.
Yeah.
I wish, on reflection, I had bashed it a bit. And
why'd you say that?
Well, I just think there were, you know, you're always thinking about budget and things you can do, things you can't do. I mean, I did some fantastic things, but there might have been some things I could have done that if I'd been a bit more prepared to bash it onto the credit card. And I think my older self now would tell my younger self, do it.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, because you know, you deal with it. You've got a working life ahead of you when you get back, haven't you? So I should have done it, but it was fine. I mean, I didn't compromise out of sight. You know, I still did the things I wanted to do, but I could have done more, I think.
Well, I have to say that that says a lot, given the fact that what we've got on this sheet of paper of what it is that you have done. It'd be very interesting to go into later on what it is that you think you would have liked to have added to that. So, first things first, what was it like trekking with the hill tribes in the Golden Triangle, and where is the Golden Triangle?
Right, so if you travel, so most people, when you fly into Thailand, you go to Bangkok.
Yeah.
So I spent a fair bit of time in Bangkok. It wasn't my most favourite of places, as anyone that's been there will tell you. It's so full on. You can't spend too long there.
I've heard that it's a 2 days and then
then you need to get out. And I used it as a pivot point to go in and out. So you jump on an overnight train from Bangkok. You leave dirty, smelly Bangkok, and then you sleep on it on a little bunk bed type thing. And then when you arrive in the north of Thailand, Chiang Mai. It's like a sort of jungle city really. It's in the middle of the jungle, but it's called the Golden Triangle because you've got it, the north end of Thailand is bordered by what was known in those days as Burma. It's now known as Myanmar, um, um, Laos, and Vietnam, and so it's like a triangle. And the reason why it's called the Golden Triangle is a lot of the world's opium and drugs comes from that area.
Wow.
So it's been
I didn't know
labelled
that.
the Golden Triangle, and that's what it's called. Um, but Chiang Mai, and there's another place called Chiang Rai which I didn't get to. But Chiang Mai is like the jumping off point for a lot of treks in the hill tribes. And you can do different varying lengths. But I did from memory, it was I think it was a 4-night, 5-day trek. So you leave all your gear back at base, and they give you a little backpack, and you just take basic provisions, and you're trekking for 4 or 5 days through the jungle, rafting down the Mekong River, which if you're into Vietnam war films often gets shown and mentioned because the Mekong goes right through Thailand into Vietnam. Oh God, riding elephants through jungle, and you actually sleep with the hill tribes. So you sleep on bare bamboo floors on these stilted houses. Got some great pictures. So yeah, I mean it's a brilliant experience. You know, we went through the poppy fields. You know, there's a bloke sitting on a little platform guarding the poppies with some huge old-fashioned gun.
Yeah, I assume he's guarding the poppies for a particular reason.
Of course, yeah. You know, and you see some wildlife. You see quite a bit of wildlife. I mean,
What wildlife's out there?
well, you've got tigers in the jungle. Definitely. I mean, I'm not a particular biologist. I don't know them all, but snakes. I mean, there was one on the last day. I always tell people this. So, on the last day, we're pretty knackered. We've been roughing it for 4 or 5 days, so I think we'd had enough.
Yeah.
You were with a group of about 12 different Europeans, all similar ages. And our guide was walking us out of the jungle to like the next major, I wouldn't call it town really, but village, where you get picked up to be taken back to Chiang Mai. And he was walking about 4 or 5 meters in front of me, and then all of a sudden he stopped. And he crouched down. He had his machete out, which he always had out anyway. And he really did sort of look frozen. And I didn't. I was the next one behind him, and then the rest of the group were quite a way back. And I'm sort of saying to him, "Well, what's the matter?" And then when I looked to my left, literally no more than not a lot further away than I am from you, maybe double the distance, this huge thing reared up, and it did rear up about a metre, and it was a king cobra.
No way.
And when the king cobras rear up, they sort of, I don't know if you've ever seen it, they fan,
Yeah.
they have like a sort of collar, I suppose you call
Yeah.
it, and it fanned out, and I mean, it wasn't as tall as me, it had reared up, but it was good half of my height. And then from memory, the guide sort of just scared it a little bit, and then it dropped down, and then I saw its body disappear back into the jungle, whistling through, and that was surreal. And because then the group caught up, and they'd seen me and the guide stop, and they said, "What was all that about?" But it was really hard to describe to them what we'd just seen, because you'd had to be in the moment to appreciate what it was.
Yeah.
I've never forgotten that, because this thing was huge.
Were you scared?
Do you know, it's
Or
really
just taken back?
you're taken back, as I think was the guide. Even the guide said, "I've never really seen them like that." In reality, the snake's probably more scared of us. But not that I've had many instances in my life, but you do freeze. You don't feel scared, actually. It's just like, what on earth is going on here? And you're almost a bit mesmerised by that situation. So if it had decided to have a go and come at me, I don't think I would have known a lot about it.
Your experience on the London train routes didn't prepare you for the king cobra.
No, absolutely not. So that's always one thing I always remember and recount family, friends whenever we're chatting. That was quite an experience. Yeah, it definitely was.
Did that colour your continuance of your trip? Were there any further points where you were sort of more scared? I know you said in the moment that you weren't scared, but where that sort of you don't know that that's a concern until you see it standing in front of you.
That's interesting because when we'll talk about it probably in a minute. But when I was on Bali, again, I was in the interior of Bali, right up in the middle, and we were. I wouldn't say it was as jungle-fied, if that's the right phrase, as northern Thailand. But yeah, I think I was a bit more conscious of the wildlife when I was in Thailand. When I was in Bali, definitely. But not to the point of view that I was crapping myself. It just made me a bit more
it was certainly on
aware.
your radar.
Yeah, more aware.
What was it like? You touched there that you had gone through the jungle on elephants. What was that like? That's something that I'm particularly enthralled with doing. Actually, it's definitely a bucket list thing.
Yeah, they're gentle giants. That's the first thing I would say. And if they don't want to walk, they don't want to walk. They will stop, and it takes forever to get them going again. But the one thing I always remember about them, and we're sitting on top of these elephants, is if you rub your hand on their heads, they have short, bristly hair.
Do they?
But that bristly hair is like really quite strong and sharp. It's really, I wouldn't say it's painful to rub your hands on it, but you're rubbing something spiky.
Yeah.
So I've always remembered that for some weird reason. It's just, because you're that close to these things. It's what you would expect riding an elephant, really. They're very slow, very methodic, very well behaved. There's no dramas with them.
Did you get any sort of sense of character from them? Because they're marvellously intelligent creatures.
That's going to sound a bit weird, but I think you always used to wonder if they were a bit bored.
I can imagine.
And I never saw them mistreated. I mean, I think in Thailand now, having been back to Thailand about 20 years, 30 years later with my family, I'm not so sure the elephants are so well treated now. And bearing in mind, this is 35 years ago. So Thailand has developed quite a lot, and I was quite surprised how much it had moved forward as a country.
So what was Thailand like when you went in comparison to what it's like now?
So the cities are the cities. So they, like I mentioned, Bangkok, really busy, frenetic, fascinating in small doses. But then once you got out of the cities and you was either in the north, as I went initially, or you were down on the tropical islands, they weren't really built up at all. And I've seen pictures of the specific areas I went to. In fact, my sister went there last year to one of the beaches. I took my family back to Phuket, which I didn't get to on my first trip. I think it was very similar, and it's really modernised. There's big hotels. A lot of people retire out there now from the UK. There's retirement places being sold. So when I was there, it was never a third world country. It was a developing country, but it's developed rather than developing, I think.
It's absolutely a tourist location now.
It's a brilliant country, but it's not. I often say to my daughters and my wife, I was keen to take them back, and I always promised myself I'd come back when I had a family. Because out of all the places I went, it was my favourite by far. So I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
You wanted to bring your family back to Thailand.
And that's it. Yeah, and I always said to my family, this you're not really seeing the real Thailand that I saw.
Not the one that I saw.
Probably could still find it, but you'd have to have a lot more time than the 2.5 weeks that we had to do it.
When did you make that promise to yourself that you wanted to come back?
Do you know what? I think I can say in all honesty when I was there.
Yeah?
Because I loved it so much. I did say to myself, when I have a family, I'm coming back. And funny enough, there was an article in the newspaper about a year before we went. It was just like a Sunday paper. And it was talking about, what did they call it now? Basically, old backpackers going back to Thailand with their family. It's like a phenomenon. And we met plenty of people that had backpacked in the 20s there that had brought their families. So it was quite interesting. So it's obviously the thing that people want to do.
Yeah. So I think that's a good segue to go into what you called to me paradise, Koh Samui and Koh Samed.
Yeah. So slightly different. So Thailand's got loads of tropical islands, loads. You know, if you see any of the films, you see them. So Koh Samed is a tropical island that's no more than probably an hour's coach drive to maybe two outside of Bangkok. So a lot of the people that live and work in Bangkok would go there for their sort of holidays. It's easy to get to. It's not too far. So that I went out to that for about 2 weeks. I mean, you literally it cost you probably £2-3 a night. You'd have a perfectly adequate hut that overlooks the beach. You'd probably have a mattress on there, and you'd have a mosquito net, and it'd usually have like a little bit of a veranda that you'd look out over the beach. And then usually there's a much bigger palm tree built bar or small restaurant. So that was a cool place. When we arrived, though, I did get a bit nervous there actually, because there was huge posters up all over the palm trees at the ferry port that actually had high malaria risk. It actually did say there was a high malaria risk and to be cautious. Like all backpackers, I was taking my quinine and I'd had the jabs, everything that you need to have. So I felt all right, but it was quite scary to see that there. There were some bastard mosquitoes, and you felt it when they put the spike in. You knew it was on you. But you meet some fascinating people. You know, I met a Dutchman. I always remember him. Really, very charismatic guy, if I'm honest. Good-looking fella, and he taught me to play backgammon.
Oh yeah.
Over about 4 or 5 nights, I got to know him a little bit. But what I learnt with travelling like this is you meet lots of really good people that you'll have lots of good fun with, and actually feel like you've got a really good friend. But then you move on, and you might know, well, you probably won't ever see him again. So you can have very intense friendships for a short period, then you move on, and it's the same way. So anyone that goes backpacking will know what I mean by that. And then Koh Samui at the time was the place to go. It's about halfway down the Thai peninsula, about probably, I don't know, 6-7 hours on the train from Bangkok, and you catch a ferry out to it. And it's just, I couldn't really describe it. I mean, if you think of a Bounty bar or, you know, advert on TV where they're showing tropical islands, or where sometimes you get celebs marooned on islands. I mean, it's like that. Again, backpacking resorts. I wouldn't even call them resorts really. Communities really, where you can hire out huts and various bits and pieces and stay there for as long as you like. Travelled around the island a bit. I mean, but what I did learn though is that these beaches are stunning and they're drop dead gorgeous. But in reality, a beach is a beach.
Yeah.
And once you've seen one or two of them, a beach is a beach. But yeah, Koh Samui was stunning. But again, I've seen pictures of it since, and it's really built up now. It's got its own airport now. You couldn't get to it by plane. You had to get a ferry out from a place called Suratani. Now you can fly direct from Heathrow, I think, to Koh Samui.
Wow.
Yeah.
On that point that you said there about that really deep connection that you find with backpackers, why do you think that is?
I think it's probably shared goal. You know, also I think, let's be honest, unless you're of a particular type of person, no one really wants to be on their own all of the time.
No.
I mean, I often say to people, the reality is, after about 7-8 months away, I was actually crying out for some time to myself, to be honest, because of all the time I was away, I honestly think I was only on my own for about no more than a week. You just meet so many people, and you've got a common goal. You're all there for the same reason. So I think you all tend to gravitate, and you've got no real responsibility other than yourself. So I think that's probably why backpackers tend to gravitate together. And of course, you all stay in the same places. You're staying in these, you know, hostels, which are very different from country to country. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen the film The Beach with Leonardo DiCaprio, and that's about a community on a tropical island in Thailand, and there's a couple of scenes in there where they're in a backpacking hostel in called the Koh San Road in Bangkok, and that is exactly what it's like. So if you haven't watched that film and you're curious about backpacking, that's a really good representation of what backpacking is like. The community on the island, maybe not. I never found any secret communities like that, but they may be there, they may not. But
Hiding in the shadows.
But the Bangkok hostels they were in is a really good representation of what they're like.
Did you find that I have noticed, because it's sort of been somewhat on my radar of I would like to do some form of travelling in the near future. As someone who can testify to not being at all a socialite, how did you find relating to the people that you were with? Did you find it easy to sort of immediately, because you had that shared interest and that common goal, just get on to that?
Yeah, I think if you're a closed-minded person and you're not interested, then it could be a bit of a lonely existence. But as long as you're open-minded and you can listen, you will end up meeting people and chatting and spending time. You know, like that crew that I went on the Hill Tribe trek. I was with them for about 3 or 4 days, and we hung around as a group for about 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then everyone else just went off on their own separate.
Did their own thing.
Yeah. So you do find that, as I say, you tend to dip in really quick to relationships with friends, and then you dip out quite quick. But no one has any resentment. There seems to be an unwritten understanding that people will move on. Yeah.
How did you feel that just that part you've touched on there, people will move on? Did that at all benefit your relationship with people when you came back home?
God, blimey. People said to me I changed. I did have friends that said I changed when I came back. I think before I went, I wouldn't say I was insecure, but I was a bit unsure of myself, as you would be at that sort of age.
I know the feeling.
Yeah. But I suppose when I came back, I was more sure of myself. People said I'd changed. It's a bit of an intangible, really, because when you say to them, well, how have I changed? They struggle to tell you, but they just say you've changed.
There's something about your sort of aura, the way you carry yourself, that's different.
Yeah, and, I learned some lessons. I mean, we all have tough times in life, and when I was in Australia, in Sydney, I'd say that was a tough time for the few weeks I was in there. But I think what it did teach me is that if you are having a tough time, the best way to deal with that is to change your surroundings, and that's what I did. So when I was in Sydney, for various different reasons, I was a bit, depressed is too strong a word really, but just not quite firing on all cylinders. The weather was absolutely atrocious in Sydney as well. So I had about 3 or 4 weeks of rain, so that was really depressing. So in the end, in fact, one of the guys I was on the Hill Tribe check with in Australia they'd given me their address and said, look, when you're over, because they all knew I was coming to Australia, look us up. So I jumped on the Greyhound bus, landed in Melbourne after about a 12-hour coach journey from Sydney. I remember ringing him, and he was at work. He was at his swanky office in Melbourne, and he was as surprised to hear from me as I was. But met him at his office. He said, look, here's my partner's house keys. This is where we live. Get out there, get your head down, and we'll see you after work tonight. And then I spent a week with him. But I felt better for having moved. And then you start again, and you go again. Then I stayed with another guy who was on the trek in Adelaide. So at that bottom end of Australia, I'd really teed up quite nicely in Asia. In fact, both stops that I had, one in Melbourne and the one in Adelaide, were with people that I'd met in Thailand. But in a weird way, I actually felt, on reflection, I actually missed not staying in hostels in those places.
Why was that?
Because I wasn't meeting the community that I knew I'd been meeting at the other places I'd stayed in hostels.
So there was that novelty sort of finding these random people from all corners of the world that you didn't get to.
It's absolutely great. But that's not to knock the people I met. In fact, the guy that I stopped off in Adelaide with, Michael, and his family, lovely family, we got on really well. Um, he then, when I got back, about a year later, or just under a year later, he actually came and stayed with us because he came to London and he stayed with me and my parents in our house. So that's how it works, basically.
Do you feel there's sort of that forever bond with people that you've been travelling with?
I do often think of them actually, and wonder how they all are. People say to me, "Did you keep in touch?" Bearing in mind this is 35 years ago, so in those days there wasn't any Facebook, there wasn't any WhatsApp, there wasn't any social media, there wasn't any of that.
Yeah.
So it wasn't easy. If I remember rightly, for a Norwegian couple I spent time with in Thailand, I did get in contact with them and wrote to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, of course, Karl, we remember you." And again, we had 3 or 4 nights on between Bangkok and Koh Samui on a absolutely virgin, deserted beach. I mean, literally, we stayed in a backpacking place, but him and his girlfriend and me, we went for a walk on the beach, and literally, this beach had no footprints on it, none. And we were literally the first people.
I bet that was beautiful.
And it was beautiful, and they were lovely people, and I've always remembered them. But unfortunately now, I wouldn't even know where to start getting in contact with some of these. It'd be lovely to do it, to be honest.
Why were they, of all the people you had seen, someone that you specifically chose to get back into contact with?
Do you know what? I'm trying to remember what it was. Do you know? I genuinely can't. I think I might have been going through stuff and memorabilia, and I think I had an address for them.
Right.
And I think I just thought I'm going to drop them a Christmas card or something like that. And they wrote back and said, "Yeah, of course we remember you." And it was Stefan, and that was the guy's name. Can't remember the guy. Yeah, but yeah, I've often thought, could I put the effort in somehow using modern tech now to get back in contact with people, but it would be like looking for a needle in a haystack. I think
Yeah,
it would be quite hard. I think.
What when we had our first conversation and got talking about this, I think you know where I'm going on this point. When you were in Bali, you said to me that you went native.
Mm-hmm.
What does going native mean?
Well, again, I think Bali's changed a bit in 35 years from what I've been told. But so the famous beach area in Bali is a place called Kuta Beach.
Okay.
And sadly, in the big, you might remember, there was a big terrorist attack in Bali. I can't remember the exact year it was.
Was that in a nightclub?
It was in a nightclub, but anyone that's been to Kuta will tell you that it's all very closed in, narrow alleyways, fairly ramshackle buildings. And if you remember rightly, there was a lot of people killed. I knew when I heard there'd been an explosion in Kuta, I knew it was going to be pretty. But it's some time after I'd been there. So Kuta's a bit full on. It's a little bit like the Aussie Benidorm. It's not in the way that it's high rise. It's not, but it's only like I think it's about a 6-7 hour flight from Australia. So it's where a lot of Australians go on holiday, and it's a big surfing place as well.
Did you do any surfing whilst you were there?
Do you know what? I didn't. I don't know why I didn't. I didn't actually. But I spent about a week in Kuta. You got to do it. It's quite an experience. And then I went off, and there's a place, and I always recommend it to anyone that tells me they're going to Bali. There's a place in the interior called Ubud, Ubud, and it's like the it virtually is the centre of Bali, but you're right in the middle of nowhere really. There's temples around, small guest houses, and I stayed there for about 3 or 4 weeks. I don't know why it didn't happen in Thailand. Maybe because I was so busy in Thailand, but often you'd be in your bed in your guest house and you'd hear all these strange bells going at like 1 in the morning, and somehow there'd be like a procession going through the high street, and they'd all be kicking bells, and there's candles and God knows what. Their religion on the island is a strange mix, if I remember rightly. Sort of like I think it's Buddhism, I think, So it's very magical, and you get the dancing and all this sort of stuff, which is very sort of mesmerising when you watch it. And all the guys walk around in sarongs. I started. I've still got it at home. I wore a sarong. I just really slowed down. You just felt yourself really slow into it and almost just merge into what they were, because it was such a surreal place. It was unbelievable. It was really quiet, calm. It was like you was living in a meditation, really, a bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
So that's why I said I went a bit native there.
You're really ingrained into that
Yeah,
culture.
yeah. I forgot everything. You just forgot home. I can understand. I did meet backpackers, and again, if you watch the film The Beach, you do meet backpackers that have well and truly gone native, and they've almost lost themselves a little bit because they've just slowed down so much and got into the cultures so much that you do wonder whether they know who they are, to be honest, at times. And that's not just down to drugs or anything. It's nothing like that. But you do meet them, and so yeah, you'd have to be careful. But I think because I was on quite a well-defined itinerary, I knew from Bali I was dropping into Australia. So I always had that in my mind that I was leaving. But it's beautiful. I mean, it's stunning, absolutely stunning. And if you do go to Bali, anyone, go to the centre. Don't just hover around the beach resorts. Go into the centre, because it's just when I was there, it was magical. It was really something else.
I know you said just on that point there that you sort of forgot home. You'd really embedded yourself into where you were. But on that time just before you were going away, where that irritation was brewed and you thought, I've got to get somewhere, was that point in Bali where you had your sarong on and you were really ingrained there? Was that what you were looking for when you went?
Well, I had a girlfriend before I went. Serious girlfriend. She actually flew out to Thailand for a 2-3 week holiday, if I think you'd call it.
Yeah.
And she travelled for a bit with me, which was great. It was really, really cool. It was good to have her there with me. But sorry, what your question? Oh, you got me reflecting there, and I've lost my train of thought. But what was your question? That was around.
Did at any point when you were in Bali and you'd really, as you said, gone native, did at any point there you really reflect on where you were?
Yeah,
beforehand?
Relative to where I'd come from. Yeah. No, I think. Do you know what? In Asia, I didn't, because for me, I was just in paradise, and I didn't even reflect on home. That changed when I got to Australia.
We should get to that point because I think that would be
that
a really
did change.
interesting
But
one to go to.
Asia, for anyone that's gone to Asia, particularly a long time ago, it's just such a different world, such a different culture, different religion, different climate, different view. You're wrapped up in it. You just don't think of home.
There's so much on your mind, so many differences that you can't help but just be immersed.
You're immersed in it. You just, like I said, crikey, hill trekking, seeing a bloody king cobra rear up on me, spending time on deserted beaches, riding elephants, rafting down the Mekong River. You just don't think of home.
There's so much to.
You just do not think of home. But Australia's a different story, I think.
I have to say, immediately when you said that, I thought something would be interesting here. What was it like to be in Penang during the Chinese New Year? Of all the things that I would imagine to keep your mind occupied, I'd say that's pretty high up there.
So when we left Koh Samui, you're not immediately close, but you're quite close to the Thai-Malaysia border.
Okay.
And when you're backpacking, you'll see, especially in Asia, there's loads of different mini buses and one-man businesses that will advertise and take you groups to different areas because they know the backpacking route or the various different routes. So there's a place called Georgetown, which is the capital of Penang. Georgetown's very colonial. it's got loads of colonial buildings. It used to be part of the British Empire. So when you land there, it's, you know, you've got all these old traditional, like almost like plantation type houses, you know, the sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it was full on. There was fireworks going off. We were knackered because we'd been cooped up in a minibus for 10, 12 hours, like knackered. I'm really gone. Anyway, and when we got on a tuk-tuk thing with our backpacks and said, look, take us to a guest house we can stay. And then the tuk-tuk guy said, ooh, you're going to struggle, Chinese New Year. Anyway, we got one, and there's fireworks going off everywhere. There's loads of people, firecrackers. It's just frenetic. It's just everything's going on. And again, it was a bit of a sensory overload. But I remember we all collapsed that night in bed and didn't fully appreciate what we were amongst. But no, that was cool. Georgetown was a really cool place, and the beaches around Penang were really nice. Didn't spend too long in Penang because I don't think it's not enough to hold your attention for an extended stay there. But again, beach, and I think, as you touched on earlier, by the time I'd got to Penang, tropical beach was a tropical beach to me. Really, It didn't really hold the fascination that it did a month or two earlier.
Particularly when you've been crammed in a coach for 12 hours.
Yeah, exactly. But and then from there we dropped down to Kuala Lumpur, which was interesting. It's capital, you know, fascinating building. Again, very colonial. There's a famous railway station in Kuala Lumpur that just looks like something out of the Indian British Raj. You know, it's a fantastic thing. And then had a couple of nights there, and then dropped into Singapore.
Just before we get on to Singapore, did you mean to get in at the Chinese New Year? Or
No, it was again. Yeah, it's really. We didn't. No, we didn't. We were just travelling. Again, I suppose it's a bit like that, but you lose all sense of time.
That change of pace, that change of atmosphere that came with being, particularly in Asia, of
that's it. Yeah.
No longer being sort of constantly on the clock, watching the time. As I say, I spoke of this. I notice in myself, I find it tremendously difficult to be present with what it is that I'm doing. How did you find that being somewhere where that concept of time seemingly just evaporated? How did that play into the way you looked at the rest of your life?
I probably use it on occasion to reflect back. Yeah. I wouldn't say it had a dramatic. This is a sad indictment of Western life, really. I wouldn't say it affected the way I approached life when I got back to the UK, because it just sucks you in.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
So, but on occasion though, there are times where I pull on my experience and say, Christ, Karl. I mean, I often say it to my daughters actually. You know, look. What I often say to them is, wherever you are in the world, there is always someone who can help. That's one thing I learned. And 99.99% of the people you come across when you travel around the world are always there. In fact, they're very interested in you, and they're always there to help. Of course, they're not all good people. I totally get that. But in my travels, I didn't really come across them. So there are things like how you manage friendships, how you can manage... If you're a bit down, like I said earlier, you know, change your surroundings, do something. There are elements of it that have definitely coloured my life, but I wouldn't say it had a dramatic, particularly that pace of life thing, didn't really dramatically affect the way I approach life. Because young lad, I got back into a career when I'm, you know, so it just happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, but you can still see the value of, you know, that there's a lesson to have been learned there.
Yeah, I'll tell you what I do. What I have learned is that now I'm at the opposite end of the spectrums now. So I'm probably a couple of years away from retirement, and a lot of people say, God, are you a bit nervous about slowing down and just looking after, just doing what you want to do? I think maybe, if I'm honest, I'm not scared one iota of that, because what I've experienced in my past life and my travels teaches me that there's so much more you can do.
Yeah.
Even yeah, so that might come into play more actually in like this next stage in my life actually, that what I learned when I was travelling.
Have you considered sort of bringing back the travelling Karl in your retirement years?
100%. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there anywhere that immediately sticks out as a place to go back to?
Do you know, it's not so much a case of to go back to, it's more a case of the places that I didn't get to that maybe I should have got to.
Right. Where immediately pops to
So
mind?
there's 3 or 4. So I didn't get to India. I'd like to get to India. I didn't get up up the west coast of America. I would have liked to have gone up to sort of San Francisco, up to even up into Seattle that way. I always feel guilty about it if I meet someone from New Zealand. You know, I stopped in New Zealand, but I was in transit at Christchurch Airport, and I didn't stop. Now, I was a mug, really. Even if I just stopped for a week and seen a bit of Christchurch, that would have been good.
Yeah.
But I didn't, and I don't know why I didn't, if I'm honest. I think I was just conscious of, I don't know. I really don't know why I didn't. So it's more a case of what I didn't see than what going back, I think.
I see. So, with that being said, one place that we haven't yet gone into that you've gone to was Singapore. Now, I have heard that Singapore is sort of like its own little version of Asia. It's a very different place to what surrounds it. What is Singapore like?
So you may or may not be aware, but Singapore is quite a totalitarian state. It's very strictly controlled.
Okay.
So not in a bad way, like a dictatorship, but for instance, the streets are impeccably clean. Now, if you're seen to litter, particularly I think if you're a native Singaporean, you can get put in prison.
Haven't they got a law, something to do with chewing gum?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, you get the sense it's a very controlled environment. Now, Singapore, I haven't been back since I went, but from people I've spoken to and pictures I've seen, I mean, it was developed then. I mean, you had a lot of skyscrapers and shopping malls and God knows what. But I've seen some of the things, like when the Singapore Grand Prix been on, you just think, my God. You know, they were just starting to build some of the new stuff when I was there, but it wasn't developed. But now I think it's like a super city now, isn't it? I think.
Particularly westernised.
Big time. But it's really, one memory I have is so obviously Singapore was a British protectorate, wasn't it, in the Second World War?
Yes, I believe so.
Which we had to give up in the end because the Japanese kicked us out. But there's a really famous hotel called Raffles in Singapore, which is where the Singapore Sling cocktail was invented.
The Singapore Sling cocktail?
Yeah, if you go to any cocktail bar, everyone knows what Singapore Sling is. But Raffles is a really famous hotel there, but it's a very colonial small building, but it's surrounded by skyscrapers.
I see.
So it's a really surreal place to visit. But yeah, I had a meal there with my girlfriend actually before she flew back. But yeah, Singapore's a weird place. It's a very strange mix of small colonial buildings and Oriental markets. But I think it's like going to Hong Kong, somewhere like that. Basically, it's a financial centre, isn't it?
Yes. So that was my understanding of Singapore.
Yeah.
So how long were you actually in Asia altogether?
So Asia, about 3 months I was in Asia.
Oh, so you'd been seen and done a lot in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, and as I say, I think I took on board their culture quite quickly. But I mean, I could have spent more, but I had an idea of a time scale. In fact, I wouldn't say I had a deadline. I nearly didn't do it, but my sister was getting married.
Oh, okay.
So I had to come back for the wedding. Now, I think there was an occasion where I thought, do I really need to get back for the wedding? Could I not get back? But in the end, family came first there, really. So I decided to come back.
So with some urgency, you moved into Australia.
Yeah.
Where did you touch down in Australia?
Sydney.
And from Sydney, talk me generally through where you went, and then we'll dive into the deeper
Okay,
parts.
so um, Australia was interesting because it was a culture shock. So I'd spent 3 months in Asia,
Okay.
maybe just over 3 months in Asia. Eating, my diet had changed. The whole thing. And then you land in Sydney, and it might sound like I'm going to dish Australia a little bit over the next few minutes, but culturally, it's very similar to the UK.
I get the sense that it is.
It's very similar. Um, I I stayed in an area in Sydney called King's Cross,
English.
which how can I describe it? It's very vibrant. Loads of bars, loads of pubs. It was a bit similar to staying in Soho. It's like Sydney's equivalent of Soho, I think. So it had its interesting clubs, but very vibrant, fascinating place. Loads of backpackers always went to King's Cross to stay there. And literally, from living in a sarong and eating noodles and rice for 3 months, all of a sudden I'm in King's Cross, and it was just like Aussie food. I remember one thing, they had something called a Chico roll, which is basically fried chicken in batter.
Sounds alright to me.
It was all right, but after 3 months of Oriental food,
A totally different, back to the Western ways.
yeah, and in the cities, everyone has this perception of Australia with the seafood and the fish, and of course that's there, it's undoubtedly. But when you're in the cities, I wouldn't say my diet was pretty good there. It was a bit of a shock to the system, to be honest. So anyway, Sydney, spent 4 or 5 weeks in Sydney, pissing down my rain a lot of it.
Yeah.
But I did the obligatory, the Harbour Bridge, Sydney Opera House.
Just on that point, just quickly, what's Sydney Opera House like?
It's big.
Was it as impressive as
Yeah.
you? Yeah.
Yeah. Ironically, my wife, her father, who's long since died, he was one of the engineers that worked on it actually. But it's impressive. Yeah, I think the location adds a lot to it because you're right on that little peninsula, right out in the harbour. You've got the Harbour Bridge not over the top of it, but pretty much behind it. It is beautiful. It is quite a building. Yeah, it's stunning. It's age, and when you think how long ago it was built, it was a long time ago.
When was it built?
Well, when I went out there 35 years ago, I think it's been standing for another 20 years on top of that.
Oh wow, it has been there
so
a while.
I think it's around 50 years old. It is quite timeless. It's very modern. It's fantastic.
I have to say, on that point, I wouldn't have known that it was as old as it was.
Yeah, it's quite old.
Because it looks, as you say, very modern.
Yeah, it's quite old. Yeah, it's got a timeless design, isn't it? Yeah, it's brilliant location. The harbour's brilliant. The bridge is brilliant. But when you're walking around Sydney, internally, once you're out back off the harbour, you could be walking around London,
and you wouldn't know. Just might be a bit
sunny.
I was going to say maybe a bit less rainy.
People walking around in shorts. Yeah, of course. Climate, but that's what people that live outside Sydney, and I worked in Sydney for in an office job for about 4 or 5 weeks just to earn some money, and I got to know some of the girls and some of the fellas there, and I was invited to houses for dinner and stuff like that. And I remember going back to one of the girls' family. They invited me for dinner, and I have to say their house was stunning, not in terms of size, but it was outside of Sydney. It was on top of a hill, loads of trees, and you're looking down onto the river, and it was beautiful. So the cities, it's like London, but the suburbs, when you're out of the cities, are very Australian and very unique. Yeah, I'll give them that, definitely. But the cities, take it or leave it for me.
So how did Sydney differ to the rest of the places that you went to in Australia?
So they're all very different. Probably my favourite that I got to, and I have to be fair to Perth and Western Australia, I didn't get to Western Australia, my favourite was Melbourne by far.
What was so interesting about
It's
Melbourne?
very it's very cosmopolitan. It's not. It's got a great cultural centre, so it's very much into music, comedy. There's loads of comedy clubs. It's got trams, really nice tram system. Sport, you've obviously got the MCG there, where there's Aussie rules football, which I went to. Again, big game.
Did you partake?
No. But I watched it. I mean, that's an assault on the senses. Aussie football.
What is? It's
weird
my
game.
understanding of Aussie football is essentially it's just boxing rebranded. It's going
To be honest, that's as a pom. That's what it looked like to me. There was just rucks going off all over the place. Even though I was with Aussies, to try and understand it, but it was quite a spectacle.
I have to say, from an outside, it just looks like all the bad footballers on the playground who don't know how to play, picking the ball up whenever they can't
listen,
get past someone.
I'm sure there's a skill to it, and I wouldn't dish them, but and it was quite, there was, I don't know how many the MCG holds, but I mean there was a fair old crowd, and it was packed. It was quite an event. So yeah, Melbourne was a really cool place. Really liked it. Then I went to Adelaide. Adelaide's a weird place. I mean, they hold the Grand Prix there. It's a bit sterile, Adelaide. It's a bit nondescript. It's laid out like an American city grid system.
I see.
And it's very, it's a bit sterile. It didn't have a lot of character for me, Adelaide, but beautiful people stayed there. Brisbane, again, I wasn't impressed with Brisbane. Again, very sterile, I thought. What other? So they're the main conurbations. But then, what the most impressive thing that for me about Australia was I went up through the middle, right up through the middle. So I went Ayers Rock, Alice Springs. And
What's Alice Springs?
So what's Alice Springs?
Or where? Yes.
It's basically a town right in the middle of Australia.
Okay.
Right in the middle of the outback. But the outback is just mind blowing. You just when you fly over Australia, you obviously see it. I mean, it's just like, for as far as you can see, it's just flat orange sand. But then you've got these strange natural monoliths, like for instance Ayers Rock, and there are others as well. That just loom out. So you can imagine Ayers Rock, which I climbed up. You can go to in those days you could climb Ayers Rock, but they won't let you do it anymore. But it just looms out of the middle of this outback, and but you'll see it from miles away. You literally will see it from miles away, and as you get closer, it looms. It's huge. So that was a great experience. The other thing about the outback that, again, I tell people a lot is, so I was on a Greyhound bus. So you buy like a Greyhound ticket and you can get off and on as much as you like. And we stopped during the night. The drivers had to have a break. Everyone's fast asleep. It might have been like 2 a.m. And some of us were awake. So we got up, and then I've never seen it before, but because there's no light pollution. There is literally
in the middle of nowhere.
no light. There is no light. If the bus driver had turned his lights off, you wouldn't see each other. It's that dark. But when you looked up, I saw the Milky Way's there.
Wow.
But I remember looking at it. I can visualise it now. But you saw all the coloured swirls, different colours, really bright stars. If there were planets, you could see planets. It was weird. I've never seen the Milky Way like that, and probably unless I was in a place like that, I never will. That was incredible. Seeing all the colour swirls and everything just above your head, So in terms of the cities, Melbourne was my favourite. Outside of that, I wasn't very impressed with Aussie cities.
Really?
Not really. Melbourne had something about it because it had a bit of personality. Sydney was all right, but once you get outside of the harbour and the opera house and the bits and pieces, it was London, really, for me. It didn't really float my boat. But the natural stuff in Australia is stunning.
Do you know, I'm glad you've said that, because I think something that would be really interesting to go into was what it was like. Just dive into that a little bit more with me, of what it was like to be in the middle of nowhere, be in somewhere that is so different to the way that normal life, or what you and I perceive normal life day to day now is. What was that like?
Um, Again, it had shades of when I was in Asia.
Mm.
So you're thinking stuff. I'm so glad I've done this. So you think that you're very grateful for what you've done. I suppose it is quite self-searching in that it makes you realise what the natural world and the world is about. And also, I guess I feel sorry for my daughters, unless they travel. One of them might do actually, but for people that have never had the opportunity to see that, because it does connect you more to the natural world. Definitely connects you.
Do you feel like there's a lack of connection in the way that we live now?
Well, I think if you haven't seen things like that, so I think that Ayers Rock is one of the natural wonders of the world. Niagara is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Grand Canyon is, I've seen those. If you've seen them, you realise there's more to the world than actually what you have in Wateringbury.
Yes.
But if you haven't seen them, even if you see them on TV, you don't really appreciate what the scale of these things is.
You can't experience it without experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's true.
Did you get a sort of, I have to say, one of the most peaceful places that I can find myself, and as you say there, we will touch on this, is somewhere like the ocean. I feel having that, watching nature in all of its might and all of its force is, to me, something that's really powerful.
Yeah, so I suppose there's two things from that point of view that brought that home to me. So it was Niagara, which we can talk about in a bit, but in Australia, obviously, I went out on the Barrier Reef, and real cheap. I mean, there's two ways of doing the Barrier Reef. You either spend a lot of money or you do it cheap. I'm a backpacker, so I did it cheap, as were several others. And we got this really tin pot boat out to the barrier, and it's a fair way off the coast. In this boat. You're in this boat for about 7 hours to get out to the barrier.
Wow.
Sick as a dog, you know. I come from a family where there's watermen in the family, so but I've got pictures of friends. We were just green, so sick. You couldn't wait. When we got to where we were going, you couldn't wait to jump off that boat.
Yeah.
And I'm not a strong swimmer, but I could not wait to jump off that boat. And I always tell people they give you a snorkel and a mask. No point going out there if you're not going to do that. So I did that. But as I jumped in, I was so sick. I was throwing up. But I had the snorkel.
Oh,
and
no.
As I came up, I blew, and no word of a lie, there was this just fountain of vomit came up through the snorkel. And it was fun. Everyone was laughing about it. But the weird thing is, because you're on the Barrier Reef, you've got all these fish then. Suddenly I'm being surrounded by millions of little fish, all wanting to have a chum on my
on your post
vomit. Yeah. But the Barrier Reef was brilliant. I mean, sadly, I don't think it looks like that now, from what I've heard. I was in Mauritius this year, and there was a reef off where our beach was with the family, and it's just totally bleached. It just it's dead. So that's a sad indictment. But back then, I've got some fantastic pictures of the reef and big fish that came along, and so that was quite awe-inspiring. The reef, yeah, definitely.
Were there sharks there?
Yeah, so there were. So they're underneath us. They call them reef sharks. They've got like white tips on their fins. They're probably about 1.5 meters long, 2 meters long, and they're underneath us. But they're not interested.
Was it not at all a concern for you?
It was a concern.
I was going to say
not for those sharks, because they're not. They kept telling us, look, they are really not. Reef sharks are not interested in you at all. I mean, obviously, Australia is known for great whites.
Yes, that was why I asked.
So you do. I was conscious of that, I must admit. The only thing I would say, when you're around a barrier reef, great whites don't like reefs. Or any big shark doesn't like reefs because they can't. It's not deep enough for them.
Oh, I see.
Even though it felt deep to me for a great white, they don't like to be around reefs. It's the same with Mauritius. You know, there's reefs all around the island, so it's safe swimming. But Indian Ocean's really known for great whites. But no, so I didn't see any. I wasn't, although I was conscious of them. All the learnings and coaching we were given is you don't need to worry about great whites. But that's easy said than done.
Yeah. I would like to burrow into that point that we've gone on to there by going into what it was like to see Niagara Falls.
Yeah, I've actually seen it twice.
So you returned?
Yeah, I did actually. So I saw it on my travels. So there's a famous bridge. So I mentioned I got to Buffalo, which is America, and there's a really famous bridge called the Rainbow Bridge. And you walk from Buffalo across the Rainbow Bridge, and Niagara Falls is there. And then when you get off Rainbow Bridge, you're in Canada. So I walked across the Rainbow Bridge. I did the famous Maid of the Mist thing where you get on the boat and the boat takes you right underneath the spray.
Oh, wow. I bet that was really cool.
And there's also a tunnel that you can go through. I mean, if you're into old films, there's a really famous Marilyn Monroe film where, I can't remember the name of it now, but where they walk through that tunnel and you're literally in the falls. And you really feel the power of it, and it is power. There's no doubt about it. But I've also been back with my family many years ago in the winter, and the winter is the time to see Niagara Falls.
Why is that?
Because it throws up this huge mist. But the temperatures are so low in Toronto, the mist freezes on everything. The trees. I went down that same tunnel and it's like you're going down a glacier, basically. The falls are still flowing, but everything around you is totally frozen. And like there's cars that maybe have been parked there during the summer. They're like cocooned in a jacket of ice. And I'm not just talking about a frosty morning in Waterbury. It's probably 2-3 inches thick ice. So if people are going to go to Niagara, I'd say go at the winter.
And what time is their winter compared to ours?
That was Christmas time. That was around Christmas time.
So it's
same season. I think it's pretty much the same. It's the same, more or less the same latitude, isn't it? But they have more extreme winters.
Evidently.
But Niagara was it's power. I mean, it is power. You feel. Wherever you are even if you was in Buffalo or Niagara, you can hear the roar.
Really?
Yeah, wherever you are, you'll hear the roar. It doesn't turn off. It's not like a tap. It's like it's there. You hear the roar.
And what did that come across as to you? Did you at ever find a sort of peace in that?
Well, again, I suppose it goes back to what we were saying about the natural world, and there's a lot more. You think about your own petty worries or your problems and challenges. There's a lot bigger things. I think that's probably what I would say. And like the Grand Canyon was the same.
Now, I have to say, it's a point that my mum has frequently said, and it's something that I've adopted, that you can go to these really tremendous locations and you do all of a sudden feel that when we're in our lives, we think our worries are the biggest of concerns. Of course we do. There are concerns. When you go somewhere like that, from what I've been told, it's this sort of reality check in a positive way. If you realise your concerns are far more trivial than you think they are.
Yeah, well, I suppose you're only a small cog in a big wheel, aren't you?
Yes.
I think that's probably what it is. You just realise that you're just like a little spot somewhere, really. Whereas, when you see the Grand Canyon, when you see Ayers Rock, when you see Niagara Falls, or you see the magnitude of the outback, and you see the Milky Way, really, you're just a little minuscule dot on it, aren't you? So.
See, I have to say though, I mean, some people would take that as a inherently pessimistic perspective. I deem it as an optimistic one.
Yeah.
I think having that understanding of, do you know what? it doesn't actually matter a lot of the time. We really do find ourselves bogged up in thinking that, as I said there, our concerns are bigger than the Grand Canyon, are stronger than Niagara Falls. They're not. A lot of the time, these things are absolutely trivial, and I find there's a power in knowing that, the world will carry on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was
and,
thinking that.
and that's a good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, exactly. As I said, no one's can turn Niagara off.
Yeah, it will carry on,
It
troubles or not.
Yeah, and the canyon will still be there. The Milky Way will still be there.
And you will always have the opportunity, if you choose to go and look for it.
Yeah,
Find
absolutely.
it yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and as I say, I haven't. There will be other things, I'm sure, natural things that I haven't seen that I could well see in the next phase of my life. I hope to, anyway.
So let's go into America then. Where did you land in America to start your trip?
Well, officially Hawaii.
Yes, you went to Hawaii first.
Hawaii is obviously the 50th state, isn't it, of America. So it is immigration for America there. Hawaii was a surreal experience. Loved it, absolutely loved it. It's such a surreal experience there. It's just weird. Well, it's not weird. My experience was coloured by a programme that there is a modern equivalent on TV now, but back then it was a really famous programme called Hawaii 5-0.
Yes.
And there was it's detectives basically in Hawaii, and I had a perception of what Hawaii was like because of that, and it was exactly that. It didn't disappoint it at all. I was on Waikiki Beach, and the hula girls are doing their dancing, the straw skirts. It's famous for surfing, obviously. We went up onto the North Shore. I mean, I've never seen waves like that. They literally had a bulldozer on the beach, and we said to them, "Why is that?" Then he said, "Well, it's because we put the beach back every night."
Really?
Because literally the waves are that powerful.
Wow.
I mean, they're huge, and people surfing them. The culture, Polynesian culture, and it's an American holiday resort basically. And I'm into history a bit, so we went to Pearl Harbor. That was fascinating, looking around Pearl Harbor and learning about what happened there, and going over the Arizona, where there's like 1,500 sailors. Literally, that's their grave. So it's really moving actually to go to places like that. So yeah, Hawaii was fantastic. It was really good.
Feel free to go further into that point. I'd love to know what you saw at Pearl Harbor.
Oh well, I mean, it's a harbour, so visually there's not a lot to see. But I suppose the thing just to highlight there is when you get there, like a lot of modern day attractions, you get ferried into this cinema theatre for a short sort of 20-minute video of what happened, and it's a testament also to the sailors that died. But the one thing you'll notice there is when we were in there, I would say the theatre was half full of Japanese as well.
Really?
If not more. And it's a very moving video they show you before you go out on the boat and on the memorial over the top of the Arizona. You can still see the oil leaking out. And there's loads of Japanese there. But it's very polite, that was an interesting experience. And there are a lot of American military boats around, but they're modern day boats. But yeah, no. So the history lesson was fantastic.
Did you get the same sort of surreal feeling of being somewhere with that much history as you did when you were, say, in the outback looking up at the Milky Way, or in front of a king cobra?
No, not really. Not really. No, it was it was more of an educational experience rather than an emotional experience.
I see.
I think going to Pearl Harbor, because obviously my connection with Pearl Harbor, I don't really have a connection with that. You have a much better connection with the natural world.
Yes.
But it was fascinating. I love history, so I've got a lot of friends, and we go away on trips every year to go and visit some historical war sites and whatever. And I often say, Pearl Harbor was really interesting. So.
What point of history particularly interests you?
I suppose I'm just generally interested in history, but some of the things you can visit in Europe around particularly around World War II and World War One history. There's some fantastic places to visit that I've been with local friends, and we go every year for a long weekend. I've seen some fantastic things, the really interesting one is Verdun down in the south of France, and the history around that's where Germany came in the First World War, and they've got forts all around Verdun on the hills, and these forts were the French used those to defend the area, but it was really a war of quite nasty attrition. So you learn about that history. You can go down, you go in the forts, and they take you through it and tell you things that happened there, stuff like that.
See, I have to say, from my perspective, that immediately conjures up a sort of emotional connection of what happened here.
Yeah.
Over 100 years later now, and you look back at this time and think, what happened here? All of the atrocity, all of the history, all of the freedom fighting that happens in these places. Where else immediately sticks out as somewhere that you think that was a particularly interesting location to look at in World War II or World War One terms?
The best one that we went to about 2-3 years ago. We went to Auschwitz. So obviously that was emotional.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I think we all, God, it's weird. I didn't feel quite emotionally affected at Auschwitz as I thought I would be. I mean, it was emotional, but the one that just really sticks in my memory, and it was just absolutely fascinating. And we drove there from Auschwitz. We went to Colditz Castle.
What's Colditz Castle?
So Colditz Castle was it's a castle, southern Germany castle that perched on top of a hill, where all the prisoners in the German prisoner of war camps, the ones that kept escaping, the problem ones, it eventually shipped them all into Colditz Castle, and you had some really famous people in there, like Douglas Bader, who's the famous Spitfire ace who had one leg missing, didn't he? And he flew. I think Winston Churchill's cousin was in there. If you look up the history, there was a lot of famous people, army people that have a history that were imprisoned in Colditz, and there's some really famous escape attempts. They built a glider in the loft of the castle secretively, and they were going to fly this glider out. And you can go up in the loft, and they've got a mock-up of the glider. I mean, this castle's high. I mean, I'm not sure I would have sat in this cloth-made glider. The tunnels, the really, because you had a very innovative, expressive type of prisoner in there, because they were all quite unique individuals. They came up with some amazing ways of trying to escape.
How did the cloth glider plan go?
It never flew in the end. They never used it in the end because the Americans liberated the castle. But it's a really famous way they were going to escape. But there's lots of history, and we had a German guide that took us round, and I don't think they get many British visitors there, and they seem to take a lot of pride in making it come alive for us and telling us what had happened. So that was a brilliant place.
And how far from Auschwitz was that?
So you drive from Auschwitz, which is in Poland, to Colditz. I would say, if I remember right, it was about a 5 or 6 hour drive.
So it is a bit of a ways.
Yeah, it's a fair way. Yeah, it's a fair way.
I'd be interested, actually. This is a question. I've never had the privilege of speaking to someone who's got this experience. Do the birds sing at Auschwitz?
I know I know that's often remarked on, isn't it? I've met friends that have been to other concentration camps and said the same. It was very quiet. Was there birds singing or not? Honestly, I couldn't tell you, but it was very reverent and very quiet. It's a surreal place, actually. It's only when you come back and then you start seeing maybe a documentary on TV, which there are many of, aren't there, on TV?
Yes.
You then put the place that you've stood on with what they're showing you, so you maybe appreciate what happened there a bit more. It's almost, I suppose, they tell you, obviously they tell you about it there, and the guide tells you about it, but it's almost so bad that you can't compute it.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
It's, you know, they showed us some. If anyone goes to Auschwitz, don't be scared you're going to see gory things, because you don't. It's not like that. It's more, they more try and present it for you to think about. And it's so bad you can't possibly compute the scale of it. If I'm honest,
Yeah, I know.
you just
exactly the
can't.
feeling.
But when you get back and then you see the documentaries again, which we've all seen many times on TV, then you start to realize, Jesus, I was there. I remember that bit. You know.
I have to say, it's I know exactly the feeling. Although I haven't experienced the places themselves, I am also particularly interested in history. And one of the insights I was looking into recently was Japan's biological and chemical weapons projects in World War Two. And as you say, you look at it and you just think, you can be told the facts, you can see the location, but there's something you just can't sort of put your finger on. You know that that's happened there, but it's beyond belief. And for some people, it is beyond belief.
It is a bit. Yeah, that's exactly it. You do feel. I mean, I remember when we drove up there, and you see the classic. It was on TV recently. The not the. There's two camps. There's the old barracks camp,
And there's Birkenau.
which actually, if you look at it, looks quite a nice building. If I'm honest, it's barracks, and it actually really looks quite nice, if that's the right phrase. It probably isn't, but then there's the like the hut camp.
Somewhat more hospitable.
The hut camp. A lot of the huts aren't there now because I believe they were all burnt when the place was liberated because of disease. But the famous where the train used to come through, and you've got that flat building with the tower in the middle. I must admit, when we parked up there, I was starting to lose it a little bit. I'm thinking, I'm not sure I can go into this.
Do you feel?
Yeah, you felt really tense. You think, oh God, I'm not sure I want to do this. But anyway, you pushed through that, and actually, as I say, if anyone's going to go to Auschwitz, you won't be confronted with gore and horrible pictures. They're there, but you don't have to. So it's more about the scale of it, and some of the exhibits are very thought provoking the way they make you think.
What were one of the exhibits that?
Well, the classics, you see them on TV, like you're going to a corridor, and literally one whole side of the corridor is full up with people's spectacles, or one other side of the corridor is full up with people's shoes, or other side of the corridor is full up with people's hair. They're the sort of things that you see.
Did you have a sort of, when you saw that in front of you there, all of those shoes, all those glasses, all of that hair, did that sort of bring into perspective, look, we can sort of, as you say, we've seen the documentaries, we've looked at it, but at least from my perspective, seeing that in front of you there, seeing the magnitude, did that really strike home to you?
Oh yeah, you can't not.
Yeah.
It's very quiet. You know, people they're with their own thoughts when you're walking around.
Thinking.
Yeah.
I have to say, I sort of sidestep saying this, but I'm sure you'll understand what I mean. It's something I would really want to see.
Yeah, I think I say to my daughters, you should go. You know, I think everyone should go. If you're capable of going, you should go. Really.
But let's on a slightly tangent note there. Let's bring it back into America.
Mm-hmm.
And talk me through, so where we had got to, I'd like to go, so Niagara Falls, just to clarify, is towards...
It's on the border with America, but it's got two sides. One side of Niagara is American, the other side is Canada.
Okay, and that was where we had got to until this point. You'd gone to Las Vegas, hadn't you?
So I flew into LA. If I'm honest, LA was all right. I stayed on the famous Venice Beach on a hotel there. Hostel, sorry, which Santa Monica Pier was up there, so I used to walk up there a bit. Went to Universal Studios. I skipped Disneyland. It didn't really appeal to me, if I'm honest.
I can't say it appeals to me.
Universal was good, and then I met up with a backpacker, and I don't know whether they still do it in America, but you can get what's known as a drive-away car. And basically, it's not where you nick the car. It's basically where you drive a car across the states to deliver it to someone on the other side of the country for them.
And you get the privilege of using it in the meantime.
But they give you a limited time to get across. So we had about 15 days. So we drove to Vegas, and then by that time we'd also grabbed in another couple of backpackers who were going to do it as well. And that's a bit similar to Ayers Rock in a way. You see Vegas miles before you get there, especially at night. You just get the glow. You can see this glow. It's incredible. So we got there. Quick funny story there. We were there on a Friday night. Everyone thinks not a problem to find a hotel room in Vegas. Well, actually, if it's a Friday night, you got a problem because everyone flies in for the weekend.
Yeah.
So we couldn't find one. So we ended up, we did the Strip, we did all that stuff. And then we drove slightly outside of Vegas on a hillside overlooking Vegas, parked up the car, and we thought, we're just going to have to rough it and sleep in the car. So one of the backpackers got in the boot, opened it up. It was very hot as well, by the way. A couple of us were stretched out on the back seat. You know, American cars are big, and so on. So we just bedded down really, and then we continued our journey the next day. But during the night, we heard footsteps, and a really angry voice ordered us out of the car. And it basically was your classic American motorcycle cop. Had all the gear on.
So they do exist.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they exist. And he really ripped us off a shred.
Why?
Because he said, look, I've come round the bend on this mountain road overlooking Vegas, which has a reputation. I've seen this car. There's legs sticking out of the boot. There's legs sticking out of the back of the car. I'm thinking there's been a mass gang shoot-off or something.
Yeah.
And he was not happy with us. He said, you cannot be doing this. But luckily, it was like 4 or 5 in the morning, so we pegged it out for another couple of hours and then got on our way. So yeah, Vegas was good. It does what it says on the tin, Vegas. But 35 years ago, it wasn't. I mean, it's pretty developed then, but all the flash hotels and that now, there's many more now, isn't there? There was. Then we drove through Arizona. You know, it's real cowboy country. If you see a cowboy western, that's what it's like. It's fantastic, actually. Then we drove up out of the desert, up into the Rockies.
Right.
And we ended up in a town called Durango. So you're higher. You start to see snow-capped mountains and whatever. It's a real cowboy town, basically, in the Rockies. Really weird. Had a night there, sat in a bar, had drinks. Kept climbing up. Then we drop over the top and we drop down towards Denver, which is at the foot of the Rockies. Strange little funny story there. Taco Bell, yeah, massive in America. Only just coming over in the UK now, aren't they? So we pulled into this Taco Bell. It must have looked a bit of a sight because we've been living in a car for a week. Anyway, we went into a Taco Bell to have some food. We sat at a table and it's service. You don't go to a counter, they come to you. So this young American waitress came up to us, she probably 17-ish. And this is, I often tell people this, God's off. So she obviously recognises, well, you're not from round here. And she said, where have you come from? And we all said in our best London accents, well, London. Yeah. Because that was the easiest way to answer. And she said, you're telling me you've driven all the way from London? And that just gives you the psyche of American Midwest.
Yeah, of the American people.
They have no perception of the wider world. And and we all looked at each other and sort of, did she really just say that? And we questioned her, and she genuinely thought we'd driven all the way from London.
In fairness, though, I do think when it comes to the American people, of all the places for you to almost never need to leave your country.
Oh, yes, there, yeah.
America's the one.
Especially the Midwest.
Yeah, I mean, there's I think you'd be hard-pressed to find somewhere or a climate that you couldn't find in America.
Oh, yeah. They don't need to leave their country, no. It was fine. It was all, we didn't take the mickey out of it. We just laughed at it, really. Then we drove across the Midwest, and there's not a lot in the middle of America. It's just cornfields. It really is just cornfields. It was twister season, so we saw quite a few twisters, tornadoes.
Oh, wow.
You saw them forming. You see a lot of them, but that's where they land in the Midwest a lot. We drove right across there.
So what do they do from there then? Do they sort of breed it, or for lack of a better word, create themselves in that location and move forward?
Yeah, and then they move around. You're on the radio. We had the radio on in the car, so you'll get newscasts come in and say a tornado's formed X, Y, Z. Keep an eye out. Usually they're there for 10 minutes and they're gone. They've collapsed or whatever they do. We didn't see any of that. You think, oh shit, this is a problem. They're fair off on the horizon, but you saw them, kept seeing them forming because the heat, such a land mass, and the heat. Apparently, that's what makes them form.
Must have been fascinating to see.
Yeah, it was. It was really interesting. And then drove through Omaha. Omaha's famous for I think that's where the American Strategic Command is, where the nuclear arsenal's all managed from. Again, very nondescript. If an Australian city's nondescript, I can tell you, Omaha, when you drive through it, you think a bomb's been dropped.
Yeah.
You just do not see anyone. Really weird. And then we landed. We drove into Chicago. Got to Chicago. It was cool.
What was Chicago like?
Different. That actually has a bit like Melbourne in a way. It has character.
Yeah.
My classic view in those days was driven by a cop show that used to be on called Hill Street Blues. But you've got steam coming out of the vents in the roads. You've got the lake because it's on a lake. You've got a lot of. We stayed in a university in Chicago, very old, historic. Looked like Harvard in a way. Very old, historic uni that during the summer they rent out the rooms. We went up the Sears Tower, which in those days was the tallest building in the world. I mean, it's surpassed now 10
Burj
times.
Khalifa.
Well, just 10 times. Had a couple of nights there. It was a really cool place. I really liked Chicago. It had a bit of character.
Would you go back to Chicago?
Yeah, actually, I would. Yeah, I would. I definitely would, actually, because I didn't see a lot of it, but it looked like it had loads of character. That was interesting. And then from Chicago, it's quite a short hop in the car to Buffalo.
Okay.
Which is Niagara.
Yeah.
And that's where I said goodbye to the guy I just spent 3 weeks of my life with, never to be seen again. That was cool. As I said earlier, that's what happens. And then as I say, Niagara, caught a bus to Toronto, and then used in the nicest way, my uncle, close family friend, as my downtime for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
They looked after me, bit of home comfort. He had a big construction business in Toronto, so I worked for him for a bit. He did give me wages, but it was just nice to be part of family.
Yeah.
For 3 weeks.
Yeah, a bit of back to normality. In some sense.
I suppose I was acclimatising a little bit. Toronto was cool place actually. Went plenty to see there. Again, it's on the lakes.
Yeah.
Went in the Sky Dome there, saw a baseball game, which was I wouldn't do again. It was like boring.
Glamorised cricket.
That's just boring. Weird thing. Very weird. But yeah, so and worked with my uncle's crews. They sort of took me under their wing, took me around some interesting places in Toronto. So one of the guys was a bit of a heavy metal freak,
right?
And he said, "Oh, come out with me for a drink." When I'd say, pick me up, and we drove into town, and he took me to a club, and it was a gig. I hadn't really thought about asking what sort of music it was. Anyway, we sat down. The band came on, and it was the heaviest of heaviest metal. My ears were bleeding. Not my type of music, but I didn't have the heart to tell him really. So that was purgatory for about 4 hours. I had to put up with that, and then it was rough.
I have to say, of all the experiences I hope to have around the world, 4 hours of heavy metal is not one of them.
No, it was tough, and honestly, I hadn't been to a gig for a year.
Yeah, so that's quite a baptism of fire.
Yeah, like suddenly to be in that environment, and not only that, it was a close club gig. Probably no more than 100 people in there, maybe a few more, but it was really like full on. It really took it, and so I didn't particularly enjoy that. But he took me to some dodgy bars and had some good experiences with him there. And that was it really. And then started to acclimatise, and then flew back after. Flew down to New York. Had 3 days in, about a week in New York.
Just on that point, actually, this is something, to be honest, I had no conception of until very, very recently. New York is quite the place. I had always assumed New York was relatively small, would be the wrong word, but sort of, I had assumed, my understanding of New York is it's that almost the way I perceive Chicago, sort of 1940-ish looking aesthetic town, sort of the London of America in some sense. That's how it's come across.
Yeah,
to me.
it looks modern, because but you know, like the building I love the most in New York is the Chrysler Building. It's the one that's got like the stainless steel top and lots of curls.
Oh yes, yeah.
That when you look underneath that and you look at it, it looks incredible building. But even the Empire State Building, if I'm honest, if you transported that into Canary Wharf, it wouldn't look out of place.
Yeah. So it's got the name.
And of course, when I was there, you had the Twin Towers were there.
Yes.
So they wouldn't look out of place in Canary Wharf. So it looks. But then you've got its really cool places like Greenwich Village. You know.
See, I heard that there's mountain regions in New York.
Outside of New York may well be. I'm assuming there are. I didn't really. I couldn't really say, to be honest. But New York was cool. You know, went out on the Staten Island ferry. Went out to the Statue of Liberty. But I think by then, that week in New York, I had one eye on getting home, really. Yeah. But it was brilliant. I really liked New York. I'd go back to New York, actually. Yeah, I would. But it was cool. Yeah, it was a cool place. Very vibrant. It's this. Is it Chicago or New York? They say the city that never sleeps. Is that Chicago?
I don't know on that.
One of them, one of the American cities, they say it's the city that never sleeps. It might be New York.
I think it is New York. I'm pretty sure there's a song I've heard that says it.
But yeah, no, it was cool. It was really good. You know, went up the Empire State as you do. You know, tick, 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 tick. Those. It was a bit like that, really.
What about the Statue of Liberty? Can you go up? Is there any sort of inside?
You can go up. You can. I didn't go up, but you can go up into the sort of ring crown round the top, and you can't go outside, but you're more or less outside, if that makes sense. Yeah. Went there, and you was talking about later life travelling. I met a really interesting woman in the hostel at New York. So she was in her 40s, and she was with a young kid, probably 14, 15-year-old. Got chatting to her and said, what are you doing? Because she's a bit of an older person. And she said she just got divorced. So she'd from the settlement, she had some cash, and she's just thought, I'm going to travel with my son for 6 months around the world and do it cheaply. Yeah. Which is why she was in a backpacking hostel, and said it's, time to do it with my son, something I'll never get back. So I thought that was really interesting, talking.
It's a very unique experience, actually, to do it that way.
Yeah, for sure. In later life.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So she had the resources to do it. So that's what she was doing. So I always remember speaking to her briefly for a night or two, and listening. I suppose I do remember thinking, so later life maybe I could, it's all right to do it.
The door's open.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember thinking that at the time.
Now, before you from New York, you went to Amsterdam, and then from that point.
Yeah, it's a bit. It's only a weird. From the point I didn't stop in Amsterdam, but the reason why I mentioned it is because obviously I'm ready to get home.
Yeah,
I am ready. I must admit, I'm ready to come home. So I flew with KLM. Really great airline. It was brilliant. One of the old style jumbos with the hump and that. The one thing I should say, when I flew to Hawaii, I got bumped up to first class as a backpack. I couldn't believe it. American Airlines in those days, I don't know if it's still happens now, but they used to overbook their flights
Right.
badly. So we're waiting in Hawaii airport, and Tannoy announcement comes over. So look, unfortunately, the flight's overbooked. We're looking for volunteers to bounce onto the next flight. If you do that, you can have a free flight in America, internal flight. So as a backpacker,
Yeah, result. Take that.
so put my name down, sitting there waiting, and they're calling out the names of the flight, and then they called my name out. I thought, oh shit, I've missed out on this one. So I went up to the desk and said, "Is there absolutely no way you could do something here?" And she said, "Oh, unfortunately not, Mr. Smith, but one benefit is you've been bumped up into first class." So I was in the nose cone in first class for 10 hours, having all of, I'm literally dressed like a backpacker.
Yeah.
And there's all these tennis players around me and people that are obviously filthy rich. So that was quite an experience. But sorry, coming back to Amsterdam, to fly home, I actually flew past London
Really?
to Amsterdam,
God, that's
changed flight into another KLM plane that was coming back to London, which was fine. It was no big deal, but that was quite a surreal experience, having been away. I have circumnavigated the globe, but literally I've overlapped myself
Yeah.
by that little stretch to Amsterdam. So I often laugh about that. Think, Christ, Cole, you actually been around the world and a bit more.
Yeah. You've done the full distance.
Yeah. But then flew back and landed in Heathrow.
So just before we get on to sort of rounding the itinerary up, I do really want to make a point at the Grand Canyon.
Yeah.
Because I have to say, this is something that, of all the places I would like to see, the Grand Canyon is definitely up there. What was the Grand Canyon like?
So we were in this drive-away car, and you drive. The approach to the Grand Canyon for a good hour or two is through very flat ground that has loads of forests.
Okay.
Yeah, but really, I was just going to say well kept. It's natural. It's not been, but it's just like really nice area. It's like you're driving through a really nice sort of German forest, really. And so you're driving through, and then all of a sudden the forest tends to just opens out, and you park up, and you're still not really seeing it, but it's quite a short walk in those days to the car park to the start of the canyon. And notice I use the word start.
Yeah.
So you walk up to the edge of it, and geez, I mean, I couldn't possibly describe it in terms of the scale. You see these films like The Martian sometimes, where I don't know where they filmed it, but it just looks like a Martian landscape for literally as far as you can see and more. And it's just, you can't comprehend. It's just you can't comprehend the scale of this thing. So it goes a long way. You can't see the end of it, but also it goes down a long way.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the stats, but I think in places it's over a mile deep, isn't it?
Wow.
It blows your mind, and it's all of these very orangey, sandy, different shades. I mean, that is a natural wonder in itself. It is a natural wonder. It's just unbelievable. It's awe-inspiring. It's quite awe-inspiring. Probably of all the natural wonders I saw, the canyon is probably the one that was the most awe-inspiring, because you just can't comprehend it. It's just huge.
Why do you think, though, of that one being the one that particularly stands out? When you've seen the Outback that has a sort of similar sentiment to it, or Niagara Falls that has got a sort of incomprehensible amount of power and force to it, why do you think that one sticks out?
I would say the Outback and the canyon had a very similar effect on me, because the Outback was the same, just as far as you could see. It just goes on for miles. The canyon, what is it about the canyon? I suppose with the Outback, this is going to sound a bit odd, but with the Outback, you're in it. Although you're not, you feel like you're in control.
How do you mean?
So, I want to be marooned in the Outback because you're finished if you are.
Yeah.
But I suppose I was with a group of people. I was in a modern bus, and I was with an Australian that had probably driven that road through the Outback several times that month. Yeah. So although it was awe-inspiring, you feel like you're in control.
I suppose you are in what is now your normal location. There's no sort of, I know, as you say, if you get lost there, then you're
You're finished.
you're gonna have quite the problem on your hands. But it's not got that sort of natural wonder element to it. It is just the place. That you find
whereas
yourself.
the canyon, it depends what you like with heights. Nowadays, from what pictures I've seen, you can do the skywalk now, can't you? And it's like a glass thing, and you can look down. I mean, that wasn't there when I was there, but the thing with the canyon, if you're standing there, it does in a weird way, it can make you feel a bit sick.
I can imagine,
because it's just like frightening.
Yeah. Oh, as someone who is petrified of heights, I have to say,
It's not so much the height; it's just the scale of it frightens you, and it's so rugged and deep. That's I think where the canyon was different. The canyon scared me a little bit. The outback didn't, but don't forget, I'm just standing by a coach there.
Yeah.
So maybe I felt a bit more in control. But with that canyon, you just look at that and you think, what forces have caused that to be created over the centuries? You know, the huge forces must have made that happen. Basically, well, they obviously have. I'm not a geologist, but I've got a rough idea of how it forms. But yeah, it's a monster.
Yeah.
It is a monster.
How often do you find yourself reflecting back on? Because I didn't grasp the full concept of how many really fascinating places you've been until this conversation. How often do you sort of look back and think, the wonders of the world, I've seen them, I've been there, I've experienced, you've experienced the world for what the world truly is.
I do reflect back on it sometimes. I haven't reflected back on it in such a comprehensive way for a long time as now, which has been great to do that.
I'm glad.
When was it? Last year, my sister's going out to Thailand. She's visiting Koh Samui. By pure coincidence, she went to the same beach that I was on. So I got the photographs out and showed her pictures of where she was going. So things like that prompt it sometimes. Something about Australia might come up in a family discussion, and I might just break the Aussie pictures out. I wouldn't say I'm that anal that I've catalogued my pictures. I haven't, but I've organised them now, so they're nicely available. They're easy to dip in and dip out of. I've kept a load of memorabilia. Still got an envelope. They're more the photographs are great, but the memorabilia is always so. Like that I mentioned about the first class flight, and bearing in mind this is 35 years ago.
Yeah.
I kept the first class menu, so that's in an envelope, and I pulled that out the other day, and I thought, God, interesting, and silly things like that. They tend more to prick your recollection than actually the photographs.
They immediately bring you back to the feeling.
Yeah, probably. And there's other bits and pieces. Like we met when I was on the Barrier Reef and up at Cairns, in a hostel again, multinational. We met a group of Swedish. I think they were Swedish. Yeah, well, no, Norwegians. They were Norwegians girls in this hostel. You get chatting like you do. You just get to know them. And they're as keen to talk to you as we are to them. Fellas, girls, know them too. And I do remember actually, one of them was your archetypal Scandinavian. She was absolutely stunning. I mean, I'm not kidding you. She was absolutely stunning. And I don't know how it happened, but she had a Finnish ribbon in her hair.
Okay.
And somehow, I think she gave it to me, or we were just mucking about and said, look, like I was saying, I'm not going to see you ever again.
Yeah.
Nothing happened between us. It was just had a nice evening.
Yeah.
And she said, oh, take my ribbon. Because I remarked, said, oh, that's the Finnish flag, isn't it? On your ribbon. And she said, yeah, take it. And I've still got my old backpack. and it's up in the loft. And one of my daughters used it last year, or was going to use it, to do something. She was going, I can't remember where. And when I got it out, that ribbon is tied to the backpack.
What a nice little touch.
And it just pricked my remembrance of Barrier Reef, Australia, meeting that girl, chatting to her, and I've still got that ribbon. And if I ever lost that now, I think I'd be absolutely gutted.
I can imagine.
Because there's a lot of emotional, not from a girl point of view, but just from an experience point of view.
Yeah, there's
tied to that backpack.
Yeah, it's something that, as I say, immediately brings you back to it. It's got so much experience connected to it.
Yeah, there's loads of bits like I've still got the bandana I used to wear. You know, that's in the drawer, and I always say to my wife, do not ever throw that away. I've still got the sarong in the loft, you know, stuff that I used to wear. So things like that.
Yeah.
They not so much photographs. That's what tends to remember.
Now, I think this conversation has absolutely done service to this point, but for you to round it up and really bring it home. I, among a lot of people, find excuses as to why it's not right to do this yet. You know, someone will say, "Oh, I don't have the money to do it yet," or, you know, there's this thing going on at the moment, or we are such experts at finding an excuse not to go across the world and go and do something. How much value have you found from looking back onto that decision of going, I want to go and do this. This is what I'm going to go and do, and doing it?
It's really interesting. So when I interview quite a bit for work. I've got a senior position. I recruit people, and I often spend the first few days with them up in the Midlands, where our head office logistics centre is. And I usually have dinner with them, just get to know them a little bit, and we all find out. And I often bring up the fact I've travelled, just because it's a good little topic of conversation.
As we can see.
Yeah, it's exactly. It's just a good thing to do.
Yeah.
And I often say to people, do you know what? At the time when I got back, I didn't really have an idea of what I'd done. I didn't really have the value or the perception of what the value was at that time. I would say in my last 10 years, 15 years, I value it more now than I did then.
What do you think that is?
Well, older, wiser, more mature. Maybe because I'm responsible for 2 daughters now and trying to coach them to get the best out of their life, stuff like that. I definitely think, so what I would say, if anyone's thinking of doing it, first thing I would say, do it. That's much like I did on that train. Yeah, I didn't really have a plan. I'd started a career, but I did it. I just did it. I wouldn't say financially I was as best prepared as I could be, but I worked. Yeah. You can always get work.
Found a way.
You know, like, I know it's a bit contrived, but like that Race Around the World BBC thing where they all have jobs. I know it's set a bit for them, but that's the point, though. You can work.
And the principle's still there.
And what then the value piece will come in later life. It's now, and after 25, 30 years, that's when you start to realise what you've done and the things that you've seen, and reflect. I think as you get older, you reflect more. Yeah. Whereas when you're younger, you don't. So I think that's what I would say. And the other thing I would say, just lastly, is it's all about risk. And I work in industrial manufacturing, and I help, not me personally, but we help keep manufacturing running, basically. And I always remember we had like a forum where we invited loads of customers to come along, and we had a guy from the nuclear industry, and we had a guy from, I don't know if you know, but Brompton Bikes.
Yes,
you know these fold-away bikes, you see them on the train. Well, the owner and inventor was there as well, and we'd invite them to come along and talk. But we had the guy from the nuclear industry and we had the guy from Brompton Bikes on the stage at the same time. Now, the nuclear industry guy, purchasing, has a very different approach to risk than the Brompton Bikes guy.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm, for all the right reasons, nuclear industry will not take any risk in terms of maintaining a nuclear power station. Yeah. But where they get it wrong is there are areas of a nuclear power station where there's no risk. Brompton Bicycle guy, he told us this story that they'd just brought in a container of 500,000 jackets. And he had this really weird jacket on during the presentation. And then all of a sudden, he started to undo poppers and buttons all over it. And literally, he was pulling out fluorescent flashes and material all over this. And he said, the reason why we bought these is because you can look smart, but then when you get on your bike leaving the restaurant or the pub, you can undo these poppers and all these fluorescent bits came out.
Yeah.
But long story short, they'd ordered these from China, which doesn't have a great reputation for manufacturing. And they'd ordered, like, I don't know, 250,000 of them. But they'd come in and they were all the wrong size. Yeah. Now, anyone, you'd be gutted. Yeah, because he said, there's no way I'll be able to get them changed. It just doesn't work like that with China. But his point, and the nuclear guy was there, his point is, look, we knew there was a risk. We decided that risk was acceptable to us before we placed the order. And we already knew that if it went pear, it wasn't the end of the world. And they had quite an argument around risk, as you can imagine.
Yes.
But that's always stuck with me. And I think that coming back to around the world trip, just think about what the risk is. And in reality, even more so, less so now than when I went, it's very minimal. What's going to go wrong? You know, what's going to go wrong? So just think about the risk. And if you can justify the risk, there's no reason not to do it.
I think that's a beautiful place to go with that.
That's how I look at it.
I have to say, I think it's an interesting point to make on that as well. As I would argue, it's sort of, I think in life you have to make a balance, or you have to, more specifically, you have to choose what you would rather regret. You'd have to choose what you can look back on and
exactly.
go, do you know what? Because you can't do everything. You know, you can't have both. And I think it's more important to look and go, would I want to get into my later years and think, I didn't do that? What if I did that? You know, I can't imagine, you know, even having this conversation with you, all of the times where that time you spent away has been called back into action and sort of defined you as a character, you know, brought you to be who you are. To lose that and to not have that in place of something else, particularly when so often the thing that stops people from making what is a big decision is fear. You know, it's the fear of doing it. How much did that play into when you went away? Was there any part of you that thought, oh God, this is a real, you know, this is a big decision for me?
Honestly, no.
You were tired and you wanted to go.
I knew I needed to do something different. And don't forget, at the time, I had quite a serious girlfriend at the time as well, and that was the only thing that sort of tugged on me a little bit. If she'd turned around to me and said, "I don't want you to go," I might not have gone. But all credit to her. There was no problem in the relationship. All credit to her. She didn't actually.
Yeah, that's
she never said that to me. And in a weird way, I think I might have been hoping she did.
Yeah.
But she didn't. So that was the only thing that could have stopped me. If I'm honest, that was the only thing that could have stopped me.
And you touched there, say you sort of, there was a part of you that sort of hoped that she would stop you.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
What do you think that is?
I don't know. I wouldn't say I was fearful of the trip. I wasn't fearful of the trip. Maybe it was a bit of, I was being a bit dismissive of the risk, which actually there wasn't any.
Yeah.
But maybe I'm thinking to myself, actually, something could go wrong here. I need someone to tell me not to do it.
Yeah.
Thank God she didn't. but I wasn't fearful in any way. And that's the other thing I would say is, even if you are fearful, when my dad dropped me off at the airport, I mean, and my girlfriend did actually, they're in bits. I'm in bits.
Yeah.
I remember I was in a mess walking up to immigration. And then the moment I went through security and I could see them, but it's really weird, it just lifted. Because then the adrenaline takes over and the excitement.
Yes, you start looking at it from the positive
So
side.
it's going to do it, and walking up to that precipice is bloody scary. And it is, your bottle goes. But once you're in it, you're away.
You're free falling and you're gliding through the Grand Canyon
you're
all
away.
of a sudden.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So lots of lessons to learn there, I think.
I think it's a really important point to make there, as I say, particularly for me, and I should take this moment to thank you for that.
That's okay.
Because it has been one of my perennial concerns, between prioritising money for one, which after this conversation sounds somewhat trivial, but that fear of thinking, I think in some ways people can also be fearful that things can be good enough or even good now, and you don't want to all of a sudden, in your instance, you had a job that was working well, girlfriend, all was fine besides that sort of brewing irritation. We sort of look and we go, God, it's all right as it is. I don't want to sort of rock the boat and turn it over by going to the other side of the world. I think it is important to make a point of, even if you are scared of it, there seems to be, from what you've said, such a value in just going and experiencing the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, do it. Simple as, really.
Simple as.
Yeah, I think so. If it's in your mind, do it. And I suppose the reality is, again, it's risk, isn't it? If after 3 months it's not for you, then fine, you just jump on a plane and come back.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, actually.
You're not. What's the risk?
Yeah, you can
come home.
You can come home.
Yeah, it's not as if you've got a one-way ticket and you're not allowed to come back. Immigration's not going to stop you at Heathrow. You can come back.
I think that's a really nice place to end it, actually.
Thanks.
It will be okay. You can go and do it. You can experience it. If you like it, you love it. If it's not for you, you've done it.
Yeah.
And you don't have that regret that comes in years to come.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to round this point out, if I was to give you a one-way ticket somewhere and you had to go now...
Oh, my God, that's a closing question.
Where would you go?
I think, bearing in mind what we were talking about earlier, I wouldn't go to America at the moment.
I think you might be wise on that point.
Just purely from principle at the moment. I'd probably go to India.
Really?
Yeah, probably go to India, because that, or maybe South America, India or South America. Probably more likely India.
If it was South America, where would you go?
Oh, blimey. It's easy to travel around South America. So you could, if you go there, you could go everywhere really. But Argentina intrigues a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, Argentina would be interesting, I think.
Maybe in 2 years' time or less than, as retirement looms,
South America might be on the cards. Yeah.
I shall meet you in Argentina potentially.
Yeah, you never know.
I have to say, for listeners and to be honest, to be absolutely truthful, for my sake, this has been a really valuable talk.
Thank you.
And to hear your experiences, see or take me where you've gone, has really given me something to think about. And I have to say, it will be something that I think about. It'll be something that I think has been really valuable to explore.
Good.
So with that being said, Karl, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your experiences. Thank you for your insight.
Great. Cheers. Thanks a lot. It's been good fun. Thank you.
Good. Whew. There we go.
That was good. Enjoyed that.
Good. I'm glad you did.